Hey y'all, welcome back. Today we're checking out Brits and Europeans hate when Americans do this.
But it's very confusing to tell a Scot that you too are Scottish, and then when they ask you where you were born, you say Idaho. After living in the UK for over 10 years, I've learned that there's a general distrust and sense of confusion, quite honestly, that many people in European countries feel when they hear Americans say things like, oh, I'm Irish, or I'm Scottish, or German, or Italian.
Yeah.
Sometimes, as Americans, we'll say something like, oh, I'm Italian American, but often we just drop the American suffix and just say I'm Italian. In this video, sponsored by MyHeritage, we'll talk about where this comes from and the arguments on both sides about nationality versus ancestry. We'll also explore the deeper meanings and cultural reasons that this might have become a thing. Let's start with the argument as to—
Yeah, it's nationality versus ancestry. This is interesting because we're all Africans, really, if you trace it back, right? Just because my ancestors lived in a certain part of the world for a while, that doesn't mean that I'm that. See, like, how far do you trace it back? You know? I bet that would be weird for someone to say, like, if I'm a Swiss person who's lived in Switzerland their whole lives, and then for me to go to them and say, hey, I'm Swiss. Probably like, what? No, you're not. I'm Swiss. Fuck you. Anyway, y'all, this is Girl Gone London, Kaylin, and be sure to go to her page and like and subscribe. Hopefully she can shed some light on this.
To why Americans do this have become a thing. Let's start with the argument as to why Americans do this. One internet poster says, if I say to another American that I am Irish or Scottish, it is 100% implied that I am talking about my ancestry. If someone says it to you, he or she is probably just trying to be friendly and relate to you, God forbid. Getting a little sassy there, but we'll start with point number one on the why Americans do this argument. From a linguistic perspective, within the country, Americans do know and understand that by saying I'm Scottish, they're referring to their ancestry, not their nationality. So while it sounds weird across the pond, and many people would argue, you're not Scottish, you're American. Within the country, when Americans talk to each other, they know that saying, oh, my family's Italian means that it is the ancestry, not that they've ever been to Italy or have Italian passports.
Right.
This gets very confusing when—
Isn't that weird? It is weird hearing someone say that, you know, I'm Italian, but I've never been to Italy. You're not Italian, but you are. It's confusing.
Not that they've ever been to Italy or have Italian passports. This gets very confusing when you mix in people who are actually Italian, or when Americans come abroad and start telling people they're Italian, but most Americans clearly understand that they are not Italian or Scottish or Irish or whatever it is by nationality. Now, my next point is that because the US is such a young country, the only people with a long family history are Native Americans. The rest are all from elsewhere, and not that long ago. It's why America is known as the melting pot. Take my family, for example. My dad's dad, so my grandpa, was born in the United States, but his parents, my great-grandparents, were both German by nationality, born in Germany, and they moved to the United States as immigrants as adults and then had children there. Unfortunately, I never met my great-grandparents, but a great-grandparent is not that far back to be able to trace the actual roots from somewhere else. I was actually able to look all of this up with the help of MyHeritage, who I've partnered with for this video in order to investigate my own family history.
Sponsor. Y'all be sure to go to MyHeritage and buy stuff.
Now, the next reason Americans typically identify with other countries is that when an American says, my family's Italian, even though they've never actually been there, they're also trying to communicate to other Americans the types of things their family might participate in the US. So for instance, many Italian-American families in the US are known for eating Italian food on Christmas Day rather than the traditionally American ham. And for example, using myself again, my grandparents were known for making German dishes that were passed down by their parents and grandparents, despite the fact that my grandfather never went to Germany. It's a way of belonging to another subset or group that helps give a sense of identity and communicate, here's how I might be different from you. And while there are many positive qualities about Americans, it can't be denied that their
Yeah, okay. It identifies your subculture. That is useful. Gives you an idea of what kind of traditions you might follow. I am English, Irish, Scottish, Swiss, French, German, and Cherokee. But when my family gets together, we do stuff that poor white Southern, Southeastern Americans do. We eat soul food, and that's about it. What other traditions do we do? Oh, there's some religious stuff, like on Christmas Eve, you don't eat meat. You eat seafood. We did that. What is that from? I think it's a Protestant thing. A waspy thing. No Native American traditions have survived in my family. None. I don't even know what they are. I know my brother's wife's family do some British tradition stuff. On Christmas, they use those crackers or poppers. What? Not poppers. Crackers. I think they're called crackers.
Group that helps give a sense of identity and communicate, here's how I might be different from you. And while there are many positive qualities about Americans, it can't be denied that there lacks a historic and cultural depth in what it means to be an American. What do you think of when you think of being American? Probably hot dogs and hamburgers, big cars, and the 4th of July. And many Americans do love those things and feel a huge sense of patriotism, but being able to attach themselves to a more established culture and history is a way to give more depth to their identity. But is it right?
Also, American history is pretty messed up. There's some bad stuff. Slavery, genocide of the natives, that kind of stuff. And we're not really proud of it. So we like to skip over that stuff and go back further into our other ancestry. A lot of bad stuff.
What about the people who, by nationality, for example, are actually Scottish? There are a lot of arguments made by this side on why it's strange that Americans try to claim these things. So let's give their side of the story. We'll start with this Scottish internet poster who says this. I used to work for a travel company, and I always used to get Americans asking where places were because they were part Scottish and that's where their ancestors came from. And I'd get them trying to tell me all about where I'm from like they actually knew better than me, an actual full-blood Scot. So argument number one on this side is that most Americans have never been to or know about the places that they say they identify with. About 70% of Americans have traveled abroad, but included in those statistics are people who have been to Canada or Mexico or like a Caribbean island on a cruise, which is much easier from the US. The number of Americans who have actually been to Europe is a lot smaller, and the number of Americans who have actually been to the country they identify with is even smaller. So to a Scottish person who is obviously born there, living there, actually Scottish, hearing Americans say their family is Scottish or they are Scottish just seems absurd. And because of the way Americans are using the term to represent ancestry, many won't be able to point out most iconic places in that country on a map if they can even find the country itself. Being Scottish to an American is simply referring to a sort of intangible history and roots rather than knowing the difference between Inverness and Aberdeen, and that can be annoying. Another argument is that Americans seem to only pick the most stereotypical aspects of the country they identify with. So for example, somebody who calls themselves Irish American or says, my family's Irish, might be really over the top about wearing green on St. Patrick's Day, but not actually understand any of the actual Irish history, customs, or culture. And the recipes and cuisine.
Yeah, I bet from the actual Irish person's perspective, that could seem kind of offensive, Like, you don't know.
And the recipes and cuisine do change within immigrant communities. So even when eating what an American of Italian descent might consider Italian food, it may not actually be what the people in Italy are even eating. So it can come across as disingenuous and kind of using nationality as a fashion accessory. Another argument is really about the
a fashion accessory. It is a fashion accessory. Yeah. People are proud of it. Yeah.
The idea that, for example, a Scottish person is likely going to be very proud of being Scottish and claim it, rightfully so, obviously, as their identity. But unless perhaps one of their parents is from elsewhere, so they have a genuine connection to another country, Scotland comes first for them. Americans say, oh, my family's Scottish, and start showing off their kilt that they bought on their single visit to Scotland, then in the next breath say that they're proud to be American. It comes across a little bit like you have to pick. Are you American or are you Scottish? Are you turning cultural identity into a collector's item? Now, what are my thoughts on the matter? I think it's fascinating as an American to be able to explore these ties to other countries that are really close in the family tree to me, and I had a lot of fun doing this in my own family research with MyHeritage. Reading old censuses and learning more about my own grandparents. Didn't realize my grandfather had a trellis building company at one point when he was younger, for example, was very interesting, and I loved being able to look back and see the documents from Germany that belonged to my great-great-grandparents. But I do think we should take care in how we express this to people who are actually from those countries. I don't see any problem with telling a Scot that you're of Scottish descent because your great-great-grandparents were from there and you have an interest in their culture. In fact, I bet many Scots would welcome that. But it's very confusing to tell a Scot that you too are Scottish, and then when they ask you where you were born, you say Idaho. So a bit of clarification is needed. Now, whether you are from Scotland or from Idaho, don't forget that you can help figure that out with a 14-day free trial of MyHeritage using the link in my description to see how far back you can trace your own family tree. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Y'all be sure to go to GirlCon London and like and subscribe. It is fascinating. I mean, it's history, right? I think there is relatively a lack of historical depth with Americans. And y'all, it's so sad. A lot of the black families don't know what country their families are from. Like, there's no way to know. No way to know. Even if you swab your cheek and send it to a company, they're just going to say, you're sub-Saharan African. No shit. Some of them are also part white, and they don't even know it, which is interesting. Very interesting. Like, I'm part Native American. You wouldn't know that. You would have no idea by looking at me. It's not simple. It's very complicated. No, it's very f***ed up. So I can't really say I'm Scottish. I mean, I am a little bit of Scottish ancestry, but, like, I don't claim Scotland. If you're British or European, do y'all hate this when Americans do this? Do you understand that Americans mean ancestry and not nationality? Because it makes people angry. Apparently. They hate it. On the same subject, I love when cultures collide. In New Orleans, the African culture with the French culture come together. A lot of horrible stuff happened there, sure. But the music that came out of it, jazz, and the food, it's like, it's so amazing. It's not that old, relatively to the, age of civilization. And then the way that the blacks and the poor whites were left with the crap cuts of meat. So, barbecue. Barbecue. Amazing. It's like one of the best cuisines. Soul food. Soul food. When I lived in the southeast United States, I was kind of like a little bit ashamed of my southeastern ancestry because of the slavery and all the stereotypes that come with it, like you're dumb, you're racist. I don't connect with that stuff, the bad stuff. But now that I live in California, I'm kind of proud of it. Like, the food, the music, it's pretty f***ing awesome. And the constitution that these people, particularly in the swamps of Florida, must have had to make life work in a totally uninhabitable place. It's a very rough existence. I do find it interesting, but really at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. And we're all humans, and we're all a lot more similar than we are different. I know a lot of people get up in arms about cultural appropriation, but personally I feel like cultures were made to be appropriated. When cultures collide, I think it's a beautiful thing. You take the best of it all and put it all together and you get something totally different. It's great. This video has really made me think about some stuff that I don't like to think about. But it's good. The example she gave about an American going to Scotland and saying, hey, we're Scottish. I could see how that would be offensive to the Scottish person. To the American, I think they're trying to connect. I think they're trying to say, hey, we are interested in you and your culture because our ancestors are from there. But because of the communication differences, because Americans can be loud and obnoxious and insensitive to the locals, I could see how it could come across as being really shitty. So yeah, most families were from somewhere else not that long ago. Personally, my family's been in America for a long time. A long time. But like Kaylin, her grandparents just came from Germany. So if she looks into her family history, of course she's going to look into Germany, because there's only a couple generations before her that were American. So yeah, and when Americans do this, it establishes a more in-depth and positive identity. Yeah, it's the in-depth thing. Like I said, a lot of Americans are not proud of American history. But if we skip that and look back further, maybe they are proud of it. Gives them something positive to grasp onto. I mean, who's going to say, hey, my family were British slave owners. We killed a lot of Native Americans and black people. It's all stereotypes. When Americans do associate with that country, they don't look past those superficial stereotypes. On behalf of all Americans, I would like to apologize to the Brits and the Europeans for doing this. And I just want you to know that we mean ancestry, not nationality. And a lot of us are kind of dumb. We're not well-traveled. So be patient with us, please. We're busy ruling the world. We're busy being the modern-day Roman Empire. Give us your money. That was an attempt at humor. Apologies. All right, then. Tension released. We're all friends now. World peace. Anyway, this was a weird one. It really made me think. I feel like I'm going on too long, and I've not said everything I want to say. I can't form thoughts. I need more coffee, y'all. Speaking of that, thanks to my Buy Me a Coffee people. Thank y'all for watching this with me. Thanks to my Patreons on my patrons on Patreon. Be sure to go to Girl Gone London and like and subscribe. Maybe pick up a mug for your warm beverages. Anyway, thank y'all for watching this with me, and I'll see you next time. Later.